we took sort of YC's motto, make something people want to the next level, and say, okay, let's build and make something people need. And what advice I generally give is, instead of building a solution deck, build a problem deck. Just write down the problem, write down all the things, which is the best way to do it is you say, I have this problem. Well, why do you have this problem? Well, I have this problem because I have this problem, which is my dog sheds a lot of hair. I have a dog. So how can I solve it? Well, I can solve it using robot vacuum. Well, great. But why do you need robot vacuum? Well, I don't want to spend time doing it. And you have to keep asking this why to get to the essence of the problem. And when you get to it, then you can build it back up and create a great solution.
Welcome to the Undefeated Underdogs Podcast, where I unpack and narrate stories of ambitious people who turn obstacles into opportunities. My goal for this podcast is to create a platform to narrate stories and maybe play a small, teeny tiny role in inspiring you. I intend to highlight the underdog mentality and make authentic conversations with people who play the long game, take action with their chip on their shoulder, and convert obstacles into opportunities. Buckle up, as I'll be bringing some authentic founders, VCs, and creators who've got underestimated their whole lives, and yet they beat all the odds to become insanely successful. Now, today I want to tell you a little bit about the sponsor of this podcast, Acquired.com. Selling a business is as tough as building a business. As someone who went through this whole process of selling my own startup, I know the pain it takes to get through the end zone. This is where Acquire shines. Imagine this: you're a founder who's built a solid SaaS product, acquired customers, and generating consistent monthly revenue. The problem is you're not growing for whatever reason: lack of focus, lack of skill, or just plain lack of interest, and you feel stuck. What should you do? The story I'd like to hear is that you buckled down, somehow reignited the fire, get past yourself and the cliches, and start working on your business rather than just in the business. You start building an audience, move out of your comfort zone, do the sales, marketing, and in 6 months, you've tripled your revenue. Well, the reality isn't as simple as that. Situations may be different for every founder facing these crossroads. But too many times the story ends up being one of the inaction or stagnation until the business becomes less valuable or worse, worthless. If you find yourself here or your story is likely headed down in this similar road, I offer you a third option. Consider selling your business on Acquire.com. Capitalizing on the value of your time is a smart move. Acquire.com is free to list, and they've helped hundreds of founders already. Go to try.acquire.com/Shoutout and see for yourself if this is the right option for you. All right. This episode is sponsored by Sunset. If you heard this podcast, you know we not only cover success stories, but also unpack the failed ones. And building a startup is hard. Most startups fail. If you're a founder winding down your business, then you need to look into Sunset. These guys handle all the legal, tax, operational burdens when shutting down, making sure founders and investors avoid penalties, reduce liabilities, and immediately move on to what's next. Their team has spent hundreds of VC-backed tech startups, sell their assets, redistribute over $100 million in funds to top-tier investors. If you're interested in learning more, visit sunsethq.com to meet with a representative from their team. And make sure to mention Undefeated Underdogs Podcast to get $2,000 off of your dissolution. Okay, enough ads. Let's get back to today's episode. My next guest is not a normal founder. I've had different sets of founders, VCs, creators, but this guy is different. He's going to change the way you clean your houses. Let me tell you that. Mehul Nariyawala is an immigrant. He's a dad. He was a YC alumni who hates cleaning but loves robots. So previously he found Flutter, which he sold to Google for $40 million. Again, $40 million. That's not a small amount. He took pivotal roles at Nest, like .com. They changed the course of their businesses. Now he's the co-founder of Matic Robots, which I'm so excited and pumped to dive deeper into this conversation. To put it in simple words, if Tesla had focused on building cleaning robots, then it would be like Matic. These guys are insane. They're building the world's most advanced floor cleaners. It's like your vacuum cleaner is powered by FSD, where it
Thank
knows where the mess is in the house and cleans by itself. I saw the demo. I saw a couple of videos in my research, and it's insane. It's so futuristic. Mehul, welcome to the show, and I can't wait to unpack all things robots. So, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. Thank you for having me and such a kind intro. Appreciate it.
No, we've done a lot. Like I said, I was the first time I'm kind of diving deeper into your portfolio and the what you did in the past. It's very different. I generally have founders who are like, they're SaaS founders. They're like very much into software, or either like creators. But I think for the first time, if I'm not wrong, I've done many episodes. I don't remember, but I think you're the first one who's more into hardware, like robots, and
Mhm.
I have a sense that 2024 is a comeback year for hardware companies. Like we see a lot of interesting products coming around. It's not hardware is still exists, right? It's not like we don't live without hardware. Everything is we touch, we do.
Yep.
But anyway, I'm so excited. Actually, so my first question is, why do you hate cleaning, and why do you love robots?
I think if I'm not mistaken, you have two kids as well.
Yes.
So my general joke is that when you get kids and when you have pets, your cleaning needs don't double; they exponentially grow you to just 10x order of magnitude higher. They're sort of a walking tornado of entropy mess generator,
Right.
and that's it wasn't that I hate cleaning; is that I got a golden retriever as a dog in 2014. And our joke is that he sheds twice a year, 6 months each. So,
Oh my god. That's a lot of
so
mess.
that's a lot of mess. So that's when we started getting. I started dabbling into just floor cleaning robots and robot vacuums. They've been around for a while, and it just. And to be entirely honest, they suck, pun intended. So to speak, not that
I
great.
like that.
And it was really interesting when I started digging into this space that wait a minute, first robot vacuums and Roombas came out in 2002. That's when we were using Blackberries. Now it's 2024. We are on iPhone 15, and Roombas are pretty much exactly the same.
Yeah.
That doesn't why. AI has changed so many things. AI is everywhere in our lives, yet robot vacuums remain this really bad. So it wasn't necessarily the cleaning itself. It's just that we felt like robotics itself was stuck in sort of a bygone era, and it was time for 2.0. And the floor cleaning robot is the first product on our way to go solve indoor robotics, general indoor robotics, with many other products. And this particular thing also resonated because ultimately we're all busy. We all have busy lives.
Yeah.
Time is of a critical essence. So if we can build a product in a world, most of the products in the world these days take our time away. Instead, if we can build a product that actually saves our time, saves our energy, gives it back to us, then hopefully we can spend more of that time with our kids, maybe painting, hiking, whatever we prefer. And that was really the motivation that why can't we actually save time from this mundane and repetitive and boring task that we haven't actually automated in a long time.
And it's no now when you say that, it feels so relevant
Mm-hmm.
because we have a Roomba in our house, and it really works. It works, but I think when you say that, when you compare it to like a BlackBerry, that
Mm-hmm.
hits different. Like because we are in no way or shape or aligned to use a Nokia. What is that? 1100, the famous brick phone,
Exactly.
or
Exactly.
even the Blackberries that you mentioned. But we've moved so fast that we're like, no, right? But we're
Yep.
still kind of marrying to this old way of vacuuming, old way of using the same robots in our house. And that, to put it that way, the narrative changes. And I think we both met a couple months ago, and I was very fascinated by the fact that you've touched such a traditional space
Mm-hmm.
that,
And
yeah.
I'm happy to dig into it. Two things that are really interesting is that one of my or prior to this company, when we did Flutter, which we can go into a bit, at Flutter, we were part of Y Combinator.
Yep.
We had 75 companies in our batch. This is winter 2012, and we used to do gesture detection over webcam.
Correct.
To give you a little bit of a color, it was
Hmm.
essentially Microsoft Connect, but just using this camera. And our entire idea was that, hey, instead of turning your finger or hand into a mouse, if you want to mute your TV, why can't you just shush it? You know,
Yes.
as computers get smarter, they should understand us. So we built this app that allowed users to control iTunes, Spotify, Netflix using hand gestures, and they were just play, pause, previous song, next song, thumbs up to like, shush to mute. So very simple gestures,
Right.
and it became very popular in Mac App Store, and then that ultimately resulted in our acquisition. Uh, but along the way, we learned that what we built was a really, really cool UX and a cool technology.
Right.
But no one wakes up in the morning and says, "Today I want to buy gestures. Today I need gestures." And this was a critical learning lessons because and
Hmm.
reinforced by Sam, who was still there, and PG would come and talk to us all the time, and he would say, "Oh, I know you guys. You guys are a technology looking for a problem to solve. Have you found one yet?" And he would repeat that over and over again. And it made us realize that there are really, really interesting, like, we as hackers, we love technology and we love future, but that doesn't sometimes solve the problem. And this particular point he further emphasized in one of my favorite essays he ever wrote, called schlep blindness. And a schlep is a Yiddish word for boring,
Hmm.
unsexy, very mundane things that are not there. And this particular thing really resonated because, I remember walking into Stripe's office when there were five people on Ramona Street in 2011 and thinking, wait, infrastructure and payments, that sounds so boring, and isn't it done? Turns out that's a company worth $100 billion today, right?
Yeah,
In a
absolutely.
similar way, out of all of our batch, we had 75 companies. Everything that was futuristic, cool, sexy, very including Flutter, is no longer alive today. I mean, we got acquired, good for us, but it's not necessarily a product that is out there in the market today. On a flip side, what survived and thrived in our big companies and went public, in one of them is Amplitude Analytics, and that was just mobile phone analytics. It wasn't rocket science, right?
Hmm.
The other company is a company called Gusto, which just does
Yeah, yeah,
payroll,
yeah, yeah.
to be horrible. And I remember they didn't even launch till year and a half after our batch. PlanGrid was another company. Rescale is another one that was part of our batch. So everything that has survived and thrived were the problems, were companies that were solving real problems, that weren't building something futuristic that may or may not see light of the day. So as an entrepreneur, you have a choice, which is you can invent a future, which a lot of companies like Humane or Rabbit or now Friend are trying to do, and amazing, good for them. We just decided to choose to go solve a problem that already existed because it was such an important problem, and it was a problem that we had, and that's really isn't as an entrepreneur, isn't the most important thing to solve your own problems. So that's how we started out.
Man, what a pivot. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect you dropping uh some of the gems there. Like you have to build for yourself. You have to find a boring problem.
Mhm.
Um and you should be okay for not being sexy or futuristic. And just hands down focus on really like what are the real problems I can solve. Not go after the technology, but go after the problem. Love it.
That's right.
I
Correct.
do have I do want to like kind of unpack your YC experience, but now that we're talking about it, yeah, just
Mhm.
2012, it's like what, 12 years.
Yes.
It's not like yesterday. So lot of things change, and you're humble enough to accept the fact that uh not everyone came out of, as a success, and you're kind of like, you
Mhm.
got acquired by Google. If you can you double down on that line what PG said to you? You're like, hey, you're the
Mhm.
technologies guys trying to find a problem. Have you found it yet? Can you talk
Yes.
about interacting with PG, expand that conversation, or like what is your rapport with him?
Um, so at least back then, we were very, very lucky to have PG still part of the YC, and he's honestly one of the most entrepreneurial friendly as well as entrepreneurial caring person that I've ever met. He genuinely cares about every single company in the batch and genuinely wants to help you and really has an ability to give you a direct advice, direct criticism without really trying to sound critical or making you feel bad about it. And it's really just comes from this deep passion, deep desire to help you build an amazing company. That's really just the motivation. So working with him was great because he was just very direct, and that was an interesting. It didn't, and to be entirely honest, first couple of times he said it didn't register. We thought, hey, this app is the product. What are you talking about? We are sort of solving this problem and bringing gestures to the world, and we realized that no, ultimately, if it's a problem worth solving, people would pay for it. So
Mm.
unless you have someone paying for what you're building, it doesn't work. And this was a really critical lesson because our background is in computer vision. I joined light.com, which was in 2006, which was the first computer vision startup in the valley.
Right.
If you go back to 2006, computer vision is a super esoteric field. Not many people knew really anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, so I was very lucky to join. But then everything we worked on at that time was very technology driven and futuristic. And that was one of the reasons why in later part of our career we ended up at Nest, and that was because we I wanted to finally work on a product that people actually paid for, and that's a very subtle differentiation, and it's critical because we also helped actually we were also part of the team that launched Google Cardboard. And for a while Google Cardboard was huge and AR VR was a huge thing. And I remember we had an opportunity to move to Nest or join Google's Daydream team, which was building AR VR. And it was very obvious in that day immediately that no, AR VR is another technology looking for a problem to solve.
Right.
It still hasn't, right? There might be a problem that it's amazing for, but it still hasn't found. So instead, we actually wanted to go work on a problem. And if you take a step back and think long term, which is we tend to evaluate companies a lot more on their fundraising initially or on their exits. But if you evaluate company from their ability to go public, ability to survive and thrive over the long period, so survive the taste of time, then AI companies aren't public yet. Robotics companies aren't public yet. Usually, technology companies don't go public. What goes public, or even app companies aren't. What goes public is companies like Uber or
Mm-hmm.
Lyft, which real problems, right? Or that's why SaaS companies thrive as well because they turn to solve a real problem. So almost always you'll see that companies that solve real problems, generate revenue, grow, are the ones that survive taste of time, not necessarily the futuristic stuff.
And if you can give us some pointers, you've seen tons of things in your experience. Worked at gigantic companies like Google to being a scrappy founder at Flutter, and now again being shooting a
Mhm,
moonshot, right?
mhm.
How do you advise founders, entrepreneurs who are just starting or who haven't cracked that code of finding a real problem and being okay with going after a boring, unsexy space? Can you talk to me about it?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of doing it. I think one advice I generally give to everyone, we took sort of Vice's motto, make something people want to the next level and say, okay, let's build and make something people need. And what advice I generally give is instead of building a solution deck, build a
Mm.
problem deck. Just write down the problem, write down all the things, which is the best way to do it is you say, I have this problem. Well, why do you have this problem? Well, I have this problem because of, or I hate, I have this problem, which is my dog sheds a lot of hair. I have a dog, so how can I solve it? Well, I can solve it using robot vacuum. Well, great, but why do you need robot vacuum? Well, I don't want to spend time doing it, and you have to keep asking this why to get to the essence of the
Mm.
problem. And when you get to it, then you can build it back up and create a great solution. But a lot of time what happens is we just think of a problem and we immediately jump on a solution, or we just think of a technology and it's like, what if it could do this? Instead, the question you should ask is, what if it could solve this? And what is that this? Can you solve? What is the pain point, right? um, Another framework and that I can give, which is really useful, is that if you think of a problem, then think of it in a three-dimension way. which is what is the intensity of a problem, what is the frequency of a problem, and how many people in the world have that. So typically, if you're trying to build the initial deck for your startup, people ask you, hey, think about TAM. But total available market is a bit of a crapshoot because it's a function of whether there's a good solution or not. So the better way to measure it is go to first principle and say how intense the problem is, how frequent the problem is,
Hmm.
and how many people we have. A good example is what I worked on eventually at Nest in Nest security camera. Now, if you think about it, when your home gets burglarized, or even maybe your neighbor's home gets burglarized, the intensity of a problem is through the roof.
Right.
You really want to make sure you protect your home, right? But then how many times actually happens? What is the frequency? Well, at least in the United States, if you go through your entire life and get burglarized once, you're already in probably one standard deviation away from the norm,
Right.
right? If you get it twice or thrice, you're way ahead. So the frequency of the problem is actually not that
True.
frequent, which by definition means the number of people in the world who actually have this problem is also lower.
Hmm.
And we know this because I remember buying a home in a cul-de-sac in Bay Area, and the previous owner hadn't locked the home for 30 years. So he didn't even have
Wow.
the problem. We're thinking that good luck to me trying to sell this guy security cameras because he doesn't even. And that's really where it is. Or if you think about getting hungry, well, why do all these restaurants keep popping up? The reason is because when we are hungry. Problem is intense. It happens multiple times a day, and everyone in the world has it. So the market remains evergreen, and that's why there is always another restaurant, another business popping up to solve that problem. So really, just measure those things, which is how intense the problem is, how frequent the problem is, and how many people in the world have it. And cleaning or home chores, which is what we're really going after, trying to build a full-blown Rosie the robot, quote unquote. We realize that that's a when your home is dirty, when your floors are dirty, it's a pretty intense problem. It happens all the time, especially if you have kids and dogs. And everyone in the world has that problem. And so that's where they just felt like a really good opportunity to go and apply technology to something that genuinely helps people.
Your answer, first of all, ridiculous frameworks, both of them. I absolutely love, build a solution instead of building a solution deck, focus on the problem deck, ask why. I think I have to be like a toddler or any founder who come across
Hmm?
toddler. They ask like, why this, why that, why this, why that. So we have to constantly ask about the same thing. Love that. Intensity, frequency, large scale. I think those three would be like an incredible filter or measurement. uh when you when you said about like going after those real problems, it reminded me about James Dyson. I was
Hmm.
recently reading about him, and I think, if I'm not wrong, after he quit his day job, he wanted to go build his own company, and he sold like 40,000 plus wheelbarrows, and he
Hmm.
failed. He got ousted by his own company, and he decided to find a real problem. And just like how you're defining Matic, he was like, let me go after the things we use on a day-to-day basis and
Hmm.
change it. That's it. And I think the first
That's
thing he picked is vacuum cleaner. Of course, he built Cyclone, the technology, that it's so fascinating that you're not reinventing the wheel. You're kind of coating a paint and adding a fresh flavor from your end through using technology. That is, I think that's, to me, that's like uh, the right way to approach. And I think you're doing in an inspirational way. So I'm just want to put it there.
it.
Yeah, you want to add something?
Sir James Dyson is absolutely an inspiration. He's built some amazing products, and I think ultimately it really just boils down to this point of view we've always had, that technology actually has changed our lives. But first, it created manual tools for us. So there is a manual vacuum, there is a manual washer and dryer where we drop things, right? Then we are sort of the disc robots, and even the cars in 2000s had the cruise control, which doesn't necessarily take your entire job away, but it helps you relax a little bit. It does few tasks for you. So it's not end-to-end automation. Now the technology is advanced enough where you can say, okay, can I just do end-to-end automation? Can I just press button to have my floor clean? And that sort of or can I just press button and my car will drive itself? And that's
Right.
really the era we're part of. So as you alluded early on, like, if car can drive on its own, that's a far more complex environment than our floor homes with the dirt on the floor. So I can vacuum a
Yeah,
robot just clean for us, and then that's really the way we think about it. So it's a really three different era, from manual to somewhat automated to completely automated.
I love that. I also want to wrap up the YC episode because we
Hmm.
can move on to the next one. Uh,
Sure.
what do you think changed in from your batch in 2012 to 2024, 12 years, the evolution of startups, or your observations in general, being on the or having like a bird's eye view. Now you're being like a founder, but I think after Flutter you were kind of working at Google, these different companies, and now you're back building, right?
Sure.
So
Sure.
2012 to now, as a founder, what are your points that you observed?
I'll even go back a little bit more. I think okay, it's never easy to be an entrepreneur. It's never easy to start company. It's never easy to raise funding. At the same time, I would say that it's relatively easier than it was back in early 2000s or mid 2000s or even before YC. What YC did and what Paul Graham did is give very, very young students an amazing ability and young people to go into something and start following their dream, because it's really the initial spark, the starting, that gets harder, right? If you to launch the rocket, the initial thrust is the hardest part. Once it takes off, it moves kind of fast. And what Y Combinator really codified is what do you need to do in that first 3 to 6 months? And that's a knowledge that doesn't exist. And I always tell that being an entrepreneur is a little bit like swimming or skiing, in the sense that no matter how many videos you watch, and no matter how many training sessions you watch someone else doing it, until you're yourself on the slope or in the swimming pool, you just don't know. And that's when you learn. And
Hmm.
entrepreneurship really jumping to the deep end. But now all of a sudden with YC, you have a coach who would at least tell you what to do in that first 15 minutes, first 30 minutes. You don't panic and you stabilize, and then you go from there. So in that scenario, YC has honestly changed the world for the better, and given a lot of people an opportunity to start companies. And that subsequently, in my opinion, has also resulted in many, many, many seed and pre-seed funds that invest in at
Right.
the early stage. Used to be the case, back in 2010. I think there was no such thing as a pre-seed or seed fund, or maybe they
Hmm.
were just free back in those days, right? You just had this few big VC firms. So just proliferation of upward accelerators, the proliferation of the startup programs, the proliferation of just funds are all great for early entrepreneurs. So in
Hmm.
that sense, things are way, way better today than they were back in the day. So that's just a sort of a relative, um, uh, relatively better, I would always say. And then in terms of YC, I don't think YC has changed. It has obviously grown bigger. They have a different style, but the fundamentals remain the same.
Hmm.
Um, if someone came to me and say, hey, I'm starting company for the first time, what should I do? My first advice generally is still to say, hey, go apply to YC,
Hmm.
because they just have acquired so much knowledge, so much insight over the years, and they may not have been able to codify exactly what will result in company being super successful, but they
Right.
at least have a very good understanding on what will result in failure for sure.
Right.
And that understanding on what not to do, and just being able to guide you in a right direction itself, is a huge value proposition. And there's just so much knowledge and so much insight there, because having seen, I guess now 5,000 plus companies go through
Right.
YC, they just have so much more data, and that's incredible. And really, with Gary Tan as the president, I feel like Vice is back to its roots and back to its old days. Gary's the OG when it comes to YC. Was part of, I think, the first batch, and he's just an incredible thinker, investor. Is just a genuinely helpful person. He helped us significantly during Flutter days when he
Hmm.
was a partner at
Oh,
YC.
nice.
So it's amazing to see him invest in, I think, more unicorns than many other popular VCs out there.
Yeah,
While and then going back to his roots and just bringing YC along the way.
I love that. Yeah, I think you know better than me. You're a veteran there, but I heard
Mhm.
like similar take from other founders. The ethics and the ethos, the way they approach startups, that's the same. It's just that the flavor is different. Like, new set of founders, new technology, new set of
Mhm.
problems, and
Mhm.
new ways to communicate what YC is through the content, the podcast they're doing.
Mhm.
That is all new, but the approach is the same. Uh, do you have a fun story that you want to share from YC, like working with PG, Gary Tan, that I think probably you never shared, or like now you want to talk about anything that's that it can
Yes.
be a fun story, or it can be like, wow, that's such a great experience.
Well, yeah, I don't think we've talked publicly a lot about this, but we actually got rejected by YC in the when we first sent our application,
Oh, wow.
and
Okay.
uh, we did it very last minute. We didn't do a good job writing our application. In hindsight, I think we wrote a really crappy application, to be honest. So I'm not surprised that we got rejected. Uh, but I had heard this rule. So someone told me a long time ago that sales begins when someone says no. It's
I
if
love
you
that.
go right, if they haven't said no, then they bought. You didn't really sell. If you say no and then you try to convince them or change their mind, that's when you really sold. So I have sort of this rule of thumb where I say, okay, I'm not going to accept no for an answer the first time. Like, let's try.
Mm.
um, so then back then, I'm sure PG still has his email out there, but at least back then it was very easily available. And I just sent him an email saying that, hey, PG, you at least got to see our demo. I think you're making a mistake. We have an amazing product. We deserve to be part of YC. And he immediately responded saying exact same thing, that no, I love what you guys are doing. It's just that your technology looking for a problem to solve. And I knew I couldn't argue against it, so I just threw randomly through this name that, yeah, but John Collison loves our technology. It's such a great technology that he loves it. And this is purely a random name throwing I did because John and Patrick were still running a small startup named Stripe. I didn't even know if PG knew them well, but I had just happened to walk into their office a
Wow.
few days before I showed John a demo. So I just randomly threw the name in case PG knew me. And then PG responded saying that, oh, John loves it. Let me talk to him. So he ended up calling John Collison, who raved about our technology and really recommended us, and that's how we got into YC. So that's a little fun nugget. And the part that's even funnier, at least to me, is I think 2 or 3 weeks after we got in, we met PG for office hours for the first time, and we told him what we're doing, showed him the demo. He was really excited about it. And then we told him that, hey, you rejected us, and then this is what happened, and you got in, and we got in. And he had no recollection of the entire experience. He just like, really? And you guys got in? And I let you in? Wow. And that was just his
Oh.
reaction. But yeah, that's how we got in.
Oh man, that's a fun story right there. Yeah, I see like, PG came back to office hours these days. I saw a couple of founders tweeting about it, and even PG himself shared some of the experiences. And one of the founders said, "You guys don't believe the personality PG has." That's what the
Mhm.
tweet is. He's like so friendly, so human, so normal. He's not like, he has a big he's not a big person when it comes to like talking to you. He's just being him, but he's so passionate, like you said. uh
Yeah.
that's a fun story. We should definitely share that. Now let's switch gears a little bit. I think Flutter got acquired, $40 million. You got into
Hmm.
Google. Now you're in this bigger corporation. You had opportunities, like you worked at Nest, and it's
Hmm.
all, I think, software until Nest. It's more of like
Hmm.
machine learning, and even then it's blend of hardware and software. So how the
Right.
hell you ended up building Matic? Like, where did you kind of got the courage and the confidence, like, okay, we can build like a groundbreaking technological company which is hardware, not only like software? So Talk to me about that transition from Flutter, Google, then where you are right now.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. Actually, so obviously we did few things right at Flutter, which resulted in our acquisition in terms of just building a good technology. But the lessons learned was it wasn't a product number one, but there was a second lesson from Flutter as well, that while we built gestures to work on these cameras, webcams. We didn't have access to webcam at all in terms of just the API. So very simple things like frame rates per second. We couldn't control that. Auto exposure, we couldn't control that. Just the focus of the camera, how far it can see, how near it can see, we couldn't control that. So at that time, while we built a really, really good app, we knew that we were building algorithms for eye. It's like building a brain, having a brain for an eye that couldn't be controlled. The eye is wavered. So at some point, we realized that we had built a half solution. We didn't really take full advantage, because if we had tightly integrated hardware and software, we could have pushed the needle quite a bit. And that also made next realization that, look, we can't arbitrarily say that I'm going to solve a
Mm-hmm.
problem, but I'll just do software or I'll just do hardware. You have to think of a problem and then think of a product. And if it requires you to solve hardware and software, you should go and solve it along the way. So that was the thing. So we knew that we had this blind spot. If we go into another startup, there is this blind spot that we don't actually know how to do hardware at all. And that's why perhaps we shied away from it during Flutter days anyway. So going to Nest was very deliberate decision, or transitioning inside Google, because we got acquired, then Nest got acquired. And luckily for us, Tony Fadell was investor in Flutter, so we had relationship with him. So we had an opportunity to move transition to Nest, and going there was few reasons. One is, for the first time we would work on hardware and learn how to do hardware. For the first time we would work on a product that people actually paid for in Nest cameras, and also the opportunity to work for one of the greatest product and
Yeah.
marketing minds in 20 was amazing as well. All three of the reasons why we dabbled in it, and we learned how to do hardware along the way. We also, if you actually go watch original iPhone keynote by
Yeah. Yeah.
Steve
Yeah.
Jobs, I believe the third or fourth slide has a quote by Alan Kay,
Yes.
um,
I
that
remember.
said that those curious about software should do their own hardware.
Yes.
Um, and we always felt that machine learning and AI, at least at that time, was bottlenecked based on computes and hardware capabilities, not necessarily the algorithms itself. So that's where we thought that if we're going to go to another startup and push AI, maybe we should do hardware too. That was one part of it. There is a second thesis which I will also kind of dabble into, and this is a bit controversial, but really true, in the sense that at the still today, and maybe things will change with AI, but still today, there is not really a consumer software business model anymore. Okay, what I mean by that is, back in 90s, and I graduated in 99. So back in late 90s, like, first, most people don't know that Netscape Navigator was a paid browser, not free.
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft Explorer became free, so then they had to match and make it free. We used to pay for maps. We used to pay for emails. We used to pay for calendars. We used to pay for all consumer software. You
Mm.
bought Microsoft Office. I remember paying $30 for each Mac OS X upgrade as well.
Right.
Even operating system upgrade was free. Now, what happened in the 90s is that, Google started releasing a lot of this software, from calendar to maps um, to Gmail, for free for consumers. Now, in some ways, it's a great thing that consumers got all this amazing software for free that made technology really ubiquitous. Chrome is free, everyone is using it. But on the flip side, we also felt that consumer software also hasn't seen innovation because of that too. So,
Right.
uh, Gmail was great for 20 years ago.
Yeah.
20 years later, still hasn't changed, right? Calendar was
Yeah.
amazing
Yeah.
for 20 years ago, but it still hasn't really changed. So once you take the incentive or ability to create value away, then innovation stagnates. And we weren't sure how that would play out on the AI consumer side as well. So will there be AI consumer app? Will they make
Mm.
money? Will they do a good business? That's an open question. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. We don't know answer, but at least we thought that it would be harder versus if you're really pushing for AI on the hardware, and if you're solving a problem, then product almost always has a thing. So that's where really we spend time. That look in consumer space, if you really want to push needle on hardware and on the AI side, some sort of hardware software combination is probably a better way to go about doing it than just software alone.
I love that. I think again you're going back to the same first principle. Focus on the problem. The problem's
Mhm.
more important than solution, right? It's whether your hardware software doesn't matter. You want to do
That's correct.
both, doesn't matter. If the
Yep,
problem demands, you have to do it. I kind
that's
of
correct.
like the that mindset. I feel nowadays everybody's raving about, hey, this is a cool thing we're building, forgetting about
Mhm.
what actually the problem is. Couple things, it's kind of like a follow up to that question about transition. You worked at Google, and Nest is being kind of that sexy product
Mhm.
at those days. And I
Mhm.
think if I read it right, you one of the reasons Google bought Flutter, at least through the internet, is to implement in Google Glass, which is kind of
Mhm.
like, is that true? How much of it that true? And uh,
Yeah.
how, because it's a failed product, Google Glass, and
Yes.
what is like that story behind that?
Yeah. So we did meet with Sergey Brin and Google Glass team back in the days when we were doing Flutter, and we showed it to them. But I think when we got acquired, we weren't acquired in Google X. We were actually acquired in Google Research. And the reason we were acquired is that at least at that point in time, Android team had some plans to release a Kinect-like product for gaming,
Hmm.
and that's where we're looking to implement gestures, and that's where the acquisition became interesting. And I think Apple was trying to do something similar as well, so Apple was interested in us as well at
Hmm.
that time, and we ended up going with Google for various reasons. But that was the reason why we did it. Now, as it happens, acquisitions take time, due diligence take time, paperwork take time. So by the time we actually closed the deal, closed the acquisition, and got to Google, that plans had already changed.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
so so then it was more. So then we were part of this team called Airbender, where we were just really exploring all these technologies from ultrasonic gestures to vision based gestures to, as I say, cardboard AR VR, and kind of saying, okay, what does the future look like? What are the future products that would come out, and how can we apply that to various technologies inside Nest? So at some point when Google started, I mean, sorry, inside Google, so at some point when Google started thinking about Google Home, that's when we knew that if you
Hmm.
ever add right, the thing, it will have gestures. So I believe Nest Home Hub Max, the flat or rectangular version of it, has a pause to raise your hand to pause the music gesture, which was Flutter. So that's how it ended up there.
So do you think they're still using Flutter, the technology today?
I think the underlying algorithms have completely changed, which is when we were doing Flutter back in 2012, deep learning was still very nascent. We were doing all the classical computer vision
Hmm.
tech, tricks. Now, what they implemented in 2019, I believe, was based on the deep learning. So underlying how has changed because deep learning just became far more accurate than.
That's, man, technology is so fascinating, right? It always, I think, inspires people when you go back to those old days, nitty gritty, and kind of talking about the groundbreaking technology. Uh, so majority of your life at Google, you were a product person, and you said you worked with Tony Fadell very closely. And in your words, and I agree too, he's one of the greatest minds in product space. He built like iPod and so many things at Apple, and then many things at Nest. So talk to me about your product expertise, that the things you learned from Tony that you're
Mhm,
kind of implementing right now at Matic.
mhm. Um, it- so I'll even go back and freely admit that we wouldn't be able to do hardware or robots or build Matic had we not gone at Nest and learned how to do hardware, how to do product from Tony and the Nest team. Our entire Nest team was just phenomenal. The colleagues were phenomenal, and we learned a lot. And one of the biggest things, even Tony taught us, is one. Obviously, we've alluded to it: start a problem, but start with a problem. But as a product, his entire point has always been that it's not just about the what we think of a physical product. It starts all the way at the beginning on when you start initially talking to customers. So how do they discover your product? How they actually learn about your product in terms of first three things that are interesting. So how are you telling that story initially to get them interested in it? Now, once they get interested, are you making it truly simple for them to onboard? Are you making it delightful? Are you, and then even after you're done, what is the experience on day 7, day 30th, day 180, 6 months down the road? Are you showing the right value proposition to them along the way, and how your product is genuinely helping? So it's really the entire customer journey and the story that you have to emphasize. And along the way, you constantly have to come up with things that delight people, that delight the users. And really that's what the focus was across the board, that make sure you're thinking through product in a very customer centric way, and as a story, and tell that story to customers, and your product is just one element of that entire story.
And do you think that approach applies for both hardware and software products?
Oh,
Which is
absolutely.
like talking to customers, identifying how they're feeling about a particular problem,
Mhm.
reacting, taking a note of their reactions, and then simplifying the experience. Yeah, talk to me about that. The things that apply for both hardware and software.
I think across the board, if you're solving a problem and if you're telling a story, stories, we humans love story. That's true for our
Mm-hmm.
customers, that's true for our users, and stories is what we get enamored by. So in that sense, even for software, it begins with, how did they discover whether it's your website or whether it's your app, and what is the first interaction, what is the first thing. So I'll give you an example. We did this maybe a little bit more intuitively at Flutter than what Tony taught us. But we at Flutter, we had this rule of thumb that, can you get customers from zero to smile in 60 seconds? What does that mean? That means that if customer decides to get Flutter app at 3 a.m. in the morning, within 60
Mm.
seconds, they be able to download it, install it, and understand what the first gesture is, perform the gesture, and have a smile on their face. So, and that alludes to having speed, that alludes to having simplicity, that alludes to having valuing the time of your customers. That alludes to also this point of view that, look, in general, we all are, and especially users are, in a very good way as a species, lazy, selfish, and they don't
Mm.
want to at 3 a.m. in the morning, especially, you don't have time to think. You just want to enjoy. So, can you actually bring that delight to users? And if you do it, then people will continue using your product. That first impression will create a strong emotional connection. And I think that's across the board true.
Wow, I like that. Uh, I think we should do a separate episode just talking about how to build a great product because there is so much to unpack. I do want to cover a couple things. One
So one
is,
more,
we talked. Yeah.
also one more thing. You mentioned how to build a great products. Over the years, I've learned, and maybe we learned through Tony. I don't remember exactly where this framework came from, but I continuously say now that there is no such thing as a great product. There is only
Mm.
simple product and complex product. And simplicity is extremely hard to achieve. So if you
Yeah.
make a simple product, by definition, it's great. Okay. And entire worldwide, people love Starbucks. I'm sure a lot of coffee aficionados have different opinions, but generally, Starbucks is universally loved. And this is because you can walk into any Starbucks in the world and order that drink, and it will taste exactly the same. The operational
Mm.
challenges and simplicity of making that happen, it's amazing for customer. For you, you don't have to think,
Mm.
you don't have to worry about anything. You just walk in and you're going to get a drink that you do it. And that simplicity is really, really hard to achieve. And having being in California, there is always bias for In-N-Out Burger. But if you ever go to In-N-Out Burger, that's the same simplicity you'll see across the board.
Oh man, now you're bringing a lot of other examples into the picture, which is, fundamentals are the same. I love that first principles thinking.
Yeah.
Whatever you're building doesn't matter, if you come from first principles. Uh, I want to ask a couple of
Hmm.
non-startup-y questions. One is, you're an immigrant, if I'm not wrong. You moved from India. Uh,
Hmm.
you've spent majority of your life in the US, and you saw the struggles of the immigrants
Hmm.
surviving, thriving, and kind of striving to the next level. Talk to me about your immigrant story. Like, what made you move to the US? What motivated you to get into the startups, and what was your entire dream that pushed you from your comfort zone?
Um, Thank you for asking that question as well. I actually moved here when I was 15, so very early on, and it was for whatever reason, I can't remember the exact details, but it was decided that I would go get education in the United States, and that's when I moved here in 11th grade and did my education here. But honestly, I think United States is one of the greatest country in the world in terms of the sheer capitalistic society, as well as the opportunity it provides anyone. So I'm here today, and it's a complete dream. I don't think I ever imagined in my wildest dream or craziest wildest dream, when my parents in their wildest dream, that I'd be here. And it happened because US has a great public school system in terms of high school, then has a great
Mm,
community college system, the undergrad, and the if you're willing to work hard, opportunity is there for you. If you're willing to take risk, opportunity is there for you. And for me, I always felt, luckily for me, I also graduated at the height of 99, where startups were pretty in vogue. So that initially gave me a flavor to go join a startup. My first job out of undergrad was a startup, and it was a
mm.
spectacular failure. We burned through $30 million in 11 months. So it was more like what
Wow.
startup 101, but at the same, the small team environment, the camaraderie, this desire to just go do something big was really intoxicating and just very addictive, if you will. And I didn't understand that right away, to be honest. When the startup failed, I actually ended up at Accenture for 2.5 years,
Mm,
and that was really when I realized that both consulting as well as big companies are not necessarily my cup of tea. What I really enjoy is the small team
right.
environment and striving for something big. And again, in hindsight, now I feel I didn't know this, but I always optimized for just learning more. I was just always hungry for learning. So that's another reason why startups always resonated, because you just learn so fast. When things go wrong, you learn even faster when things go right. And
Mm,
across the board, it was just amazing to the learning that I had for that first year was so much different and so much more than the 2.5 years spent at Accenture. So it just made sense to go back to startups and start learning. And then I just thought that there were a lot of really amazing, ambitious people across the board. And reason to move to Silicon Valley. And I was in Florida as an in my high school, then moved to DC area for undergrad at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, then made my way to Chicago for business school, and then I moved
mm.
westward. And I also moved westward. The reason I moved to Valley, I give credit to this alum of University of Chicago, Booth. She unfortunately passed away, but her name was Catherine Gould, and if I remember correctly, she said that she was the 14th employee at Oracle, and she built a
Wow.
huge Rolodex of contacts after her stint at Oracle, and eventually started a venture capital firm in Foundation Capital. So really, really amazing career. And I remember still sitting in a room where she came, and her point was that, hey, in 1980s, I moved to Silicon Valley because I thought that was the next big thing. That was the rocket ship, and I just wanted to be on the rocket ship of an area. You guys should figure out what is a rocket ship of an area. And this is still 2005, so it's not like internet and online world was as ubiquitous that you could be anywhere in the world and do your thing. It was still
Right.
a lot done offline. So her point was that you should figure out what's the next Silicon Valley and move there. And I thought quite hard about it, and I just thought that next Silicon Valley was still Silicon Valley. So I just ended up, I was pretty set on moving to Silicon Valley after that.
Yeah, I was about to ask. One of the things I want to ask is about the impact of Valley, you being in SF.
Mhm.
Everything happens there. Would It's a right question to ask now because you've done so much. Would you have done the same what you did in the past elsewhere?
I don't think so. I don't think so. The reason I say I don't think so is okay. I'll caveat this by saying that I haven't lived outside of Silicon Valley for 20 years now, so I don't necessarily have a good understanding on what it feels like to be outside of it. But at least um, back then in 2005,
Mm-hmm.
um, when I moved from Chicago to Silicon Valley, San Francisco for the first time, it was a shock. And the reason it was a shock is because I felt like the entire Silicon Valley was 10 years ahead in terms of technology, in terms of just the future understanding on where the world is going. And I thought I knew
Right.
technology, having worked at a startup in Northern Virginia area and then Chicago. But when I got there, it was just absolutely stunning how advanced the world was. And there was no one thing which is also kind of crazy here, and I still think it's true, is generally people do not believe anything is impossible from technological point of view. No one says that, hey,
Mm.
technology is impossible. No one here says that AGI is impossible. They just argue about when and how, but not necessarily if. That's very
Mm.
interesting and unique mindset, and that really rubs off of everyone. And this place might be the only place that if you've been in Silicon Valley for 20 years and you've only worked at Google, there is a good chance someone may look at you and say, wait, really, you've never done a startup? You've never taken a shot?
Mm.
So it's only one place where being in a long big company for 20 years is an anomaly, versus doing a startup. So that's the way I think about it. So I don't think so. This area is just incredibly uh, um, um, incredibly ambitious, and I think it's because
Oh,
not the area, just that there is there are incredibly ambitious people all over the world who choose to move to Silicon Valley all the time, and that ends up making this place quite ambitious.
I think ambition is contagious. I think Valley proves that statement. It's kind of like it spreads on everybody, and uh, no matter how
Ambition
big
is
of how small, bigger your dreams are. That's what one of the dreams I have. I'm still chasing is to move to Valley some point and build a company there. It's always like fascinating
Mhm.
from an outside standpoint, but also at the same time, the primary reason is how can I be part of a set of people who are thinking in just like you've defined it. You've defined Silicon Valley in the right way. It's not about if, it's about when and how.
That's correct.
So
That's correct.
being in that conversation itself is it's so fascinating to me. It's like imagining that is like so motivating because
Mhm.
there is not a chance that it won't be possible. It's just like when are you going to figure it out? And you take help, you seek help, you rely on people so that they show how, right? This is how it can be done. And you basically have to be in the right set, and I think the right set is in Valley. So I really love the way you define. I think that's something
Thank you.
kind of very unconventional, right? They say that it's all the people believe that they have a mindset, but I think that's the right way.
That's
I want to talk about, now that we're talking about ambitions, uh, I see Matic Robots as being more of like a moonshot, which is like a generational company, and it's not easy or simple. It's more complex. There are so many things. So talk to me about taking Matic Robots to 0 to 1. What was that first phase look like for you guys? You're a big team now. You're not like scrappy. You have a working product, and yeah, talk to me about the struggles, the things that people generally don't hear about building a hardware company.
yeah. Uh, uh, I think so. I think there's someone said it that if people knew how hard it was going to be, there's a good chance they would never start, right? And I think that remains true
Mm.
across the board, any entrepreneur journey, any startup. So naivety in ignorance is kind of cool in that way. But if the way I always talk about also is that if you're trying to come up with a rational, logical reasoning on why you should start a company or you should take an entrepreneurial plunge. Well, I hate to break it to anyone that there is no rational or logical reason. It's completely emotional.
Right.
So so
Absolutely.
Matic so Matic was this itch, which is one of the itch that we always had, even when we were at Nest. So I worked at Nest Camera. Nest cameras are amazing product, but I don't think of Nest cameras as iconic product. Nest thermostat is an iconic product, and that's what Nest is remembered for. iPod is, iPhone is, Model S's. These are the products, Chat GPTs. These are the products that come to the market and change the perception of what's possible, right? And we had this desire that while we had been in AI and computer vision and on the forefront of technology for all of our career, we had yet to put everything together and build what we thought was an iconic product. And that's really why we started going after Matic, and that iconic product had to solve a real problem, and it had to be something that changes the perception of what's possible. And that's really how we started thinking about it. And we just thought that indoor robotics, home robotics, is where field was stagnant, that no one was thinking this from first principles or algorithms first. And if we come and build a really good product, let's say Tesla FSD for the home robots, then that's a changing thing. So that was the desire. And I think, you know, second time around, when we started Flutter, we just came up with the idea and started running. This time around, we sat down and we spent quite a bit of time thinking through everything we want to do. And the reason, and it was very much from day one, we knew that this was going to be a long-term thing. We wrote down on a piece
Mm.
of paper that whatever we do next, we don't want to get acquired. And that was part of the rule.
Mm.
That means let's take a idea that is so big and so hairy and so challenging that we can spend rest of our careers on it and not get bored and keep learning. And robotics is
Wow.
absolutely the way. And and um, and it had to take advantage of computer vision and AI, which was our strength. So those were the three things. And this robotics was a space where we thought we could apply and keep building for a long, long time, because we genuinely felt like robotics was on the cusp of breaking out. And and it took 7 years, but it's starting
Mm-hmm.
to break out here. So we just felt that robotics was on a cusp of breaking out given advances in AI, and Navneet, my co-founder, helped design Google Coral TPU. So we knew this AI chips or higher computes are also coming, which would have a huge impact on the future. So we knew at that point in time, and that's why we started early. At the same time, we thought our joke is that we are only off by one digit in terms of shipping, because we thought we would ship in 2020. Now we're looking at 2024 and finally starting to ship. So
Mm.
it took us way longer, and I think it's it. I had heard this general rule of thumb that whatever you do as a startup, it will take 2x the money and 2x the time than you anticipate. So it is
Right.
2x the time. And what kept us going is that it's that there's this deep conviction that this is a real problem for people and this is a real need. And we started in 2017 thinking space hasn't changed, and disc robots are exactly the same.
Right.
It's right. It's 2024, 7 years later, and it's still the same. Nothing has really changed. And what's interesting about floor cleaning category, which most people don't realize, because there's this perception that it's saturated or highly competitive, but actually it's not neither of those things. What's interesting about this category is that it's growing at 18% year over year for last 7 years, even though net promoter score for this category is -1, which is I've never met anyone who says
Mm.
robotic vacuum in my life. Or yeah, it's a product everyone keeps buying. Everyone complains about it. Everyone
Right.
hates when it gets stuck or
Yeah.
when it pulls
It's
up
a necessity,
fire.
right? You have to have it. Yeah.
That's correct. So it's a market where net promoter score is -1. No one loves it, yet it's growing, which means it's a real need. The intensity of a problem is really high and frequency is really high. And if in this market, if you can come and deliver a better product, there is clearly an opportunity. So that was there. Now, other
Mm.
interesting piece of the puzzle, by the way. So as I mentioned, it's grown 18% year over year for the last 7 years. Only other category in hardware space or consumer electronics space that has grown that fast for that long is smartphone category, and that also after introduction of iPhone.
Mm.
And this is one piece of the puzzle that most people don't understand. I think iRobot had sold an iRobot, which is the name of the company that sells Roomba.
The room.
They had altogether about 10 million robots by 2015. So from 2002 to 2015, in 13 years, they had sold 10 million robots. In last 9 years
Wow.
since then, they have sold 40 million more. So cumulatively 50 million. So they've actually grown
Wow.
exponentially, ever innovating at all in some ways. And that shows the need and intensity of a problem. And if you can innovate, there's a huge opportunity.
I think that's why I describe you guys as the Tesla of
Thank you.
vacuum cleaners, at least right now, because yeah, everything is traditional except like the Dyson. That's a separate category, but those are not robots. You have to do it manually by yourself. I don't know when they're going to come into the market. I have a very curious question.
Yeah,
It
please.
took 7 years, and I think you're selling uh, now, right?
Yes. Yes.
Generally, again, I'm not a hardware person, at least, but if you take that much long when you're in a software company, or at least in the other side of the spectrum, panic is anxiety, panic, fear is always at the heights because you're not doing much. There is no output, there is only input. And especially hardware, being hardware, you have to do spend so much time in R&D.
Yeah.
Manufacturing comes into place,
Mhm.
distribution different. There are like it's so fucking complex, period,
Yeah.
when it
Yes.
comes to hardware. How do you manage your anxiety levels as a founder? Runway, maintaining people, keeping the morale high, not losing hope, but still like, hey, we can do this. And I just am very curious about, because I think the only other person I feel who's still chasing is Elon Musk with the
Right.
with SpaceX, like pushing, So I'm just curious, hardware people, how do you do it? Like in your perspective, how do you do it?
So I'll answer this question in two parts. So first, I want to address saying that it's actually just not hardware. Hardware is absolutely hard, and I would say robotics within the hardware is probably, if hardware is hard, then robotics is 10x harder. But
Right.
actually, just building a great product is always hard. So, if you
That's
go
true.
back and look at Figma, I think believe took 4 or 5 years to launch, and I think Dylan Field is very infamous for saying that it will take. I would try to do it faster, that I would launch
Right.
earlier, and there are lessons you would probably learn. But the reality is, it's a great product, and that great product took time. Notion, again, a product where I think the founder is infamous for talking about how they were in wilderness for a long, long time, and it took them 5 years to really
Right.
get there. So anything worth building takes time. I believe Superhuman took a long time before they got good as
Yeah.
well. Similarly, OpenAI was in wilderness for 6 years doing a lot of research stuff
True. True.
before
Yeah.
they launched.
Let me,
So
I
I was
I
gonna
think you're,
say
you're
that
you're kind of
anything.
shutting me down here. So you're
No,
kind
no,
of shutting me down showing these examples. But okay, let me reframe the question. When you build a company, it takes time. How hard it is? I wanna hear from a founder standpoint. No, I'm just joking. You go on.
I wasn't trying to shut down. I was just wanted to kind of. I think there is misperception or misconception that only hardware is hard, and I would like to say that any product, software, hardware,
Mm,
any great or simple product, as we sort of talked about, worth building
yeah.
is takes time. It's hard. So you have to be in it for the long term, and the only way you get through day to day is I don't have it in this office, but our prior office, I used to have a desk, and there was a wall, and on that wall I had a poster, and that poster said, "Just keep swimming," which is, how do you find Nemo?
Mm,
You just, and that's really the
yeah.
answer to thinking every day, that you have to you have to think long term, you have to plan long term, but on a day to day basis, you have to kind of narrow your focus and just shift on making progress day to day in a very, very minute manner, and just focus on taking action that day, and kind of succeeding that day. And these are all things that became relevant because you hear this in sports, right? In sports, you hear a lot of people saying one play at a time, one practice at a time, one game at a
Yeah.
time, which is they're trying to win championship. And those all sounds like cliche, but really that's it. It's like, how do you climb Mount Everest? Well, one step at a time. So in the same exact way, the way the anxiety is real, the you obviously have to um, pace yourselves. And there's always ups and downs. um, I don't believe anyone who says they don't have up and down. There are always challenges you face, but you just roll up the sleeve next day and start going again, and you keep doing it enough eventually, and you get there.
That
Really, I don't
is,
have anything except saying just keep swimming.
yeah, yeah. I love that. I think it is so simple but yet so profound. And you have to just kind of uh, do it to know it, right? If you
Yeah,
don't do it, you don't know it. So you have to kind of do that. I think just keep swimming is the same thing. You have to show up, do it, be better, and then it'll
that's
come. We don't know when, just have to go.
And there was a really good framework. I'll actually give credit to Scott Belsky for it, who's obviously doing all the amazing stuff at Adobe and was a partner at Benchmark, a really brilliant product mind as well. Um, and he had this good framework, and he said that as an entrepreneur, once you start your journey, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years into it, do you have more conviction in your idea or less? If knowing what you know
Hmm.
now after 3 years of on that journey, if you have more conviction, then you absolutely need to keep going. If your conviction has gone
Hmm.
down, then you may think about pivoting or doing different things. So that's sort of a difference between, not falling for sunk cost fallacy, which is when do you persevere and when do you pivot and how do you think about it. And that was really good framework, that if the conviction in what you're doing is there, then you have to keep going. And I think for us, the conviction has only gotten stronger. The more feedback we get from our customers, the more we talk to our customers, the more we understand the usage across the board, we can see this hunger from people to get a better product that actually works in a intelligent way, and that
Hmm.
desire is still there. That just allows us to keep going. That we know that if we ship this and it works as it's supposed to, then we know people will love it.
Awesome. I think that this brings me like a right segue to this question. Given the conviction has gone higher, uh,
Mhm,
what is something that you're excited about Matic in the next few years? You're right now, you're at the cleaning side, the robots that cleans by itself. I think I'm just going to the website and it's ridiculous. It's like it has real time 3D mapping. What the fuck? It's
mhm,
not. It's not a NASA bot. It auto toggles between mopping and vacuum. It knows, and it has gestures. It can activate by voice. It has like, you don't need to be supervising it. It knows,
mhm,
when the mess is here, when to clean. It has
mhm.
scheduling and stuff. The website is insane, guys. You just have to go through the level of thought and then, insight these guys put in. Yeah, is this the beginning, or are you guys going to double down, like take iPhone as a product, right? My question is more on like, do you see Matic being like an empire of robotic products, just like Apple
Yeah.
has an iPhone, iPod, like like Apple Watch, the headphones and all that? Or what do you think? What is the future of Matic?
I think we wrote this down on day one as well, that our goal was to be Apple of home robotics, or Tesla of home robotics, if you will, and that is really the way we are going after. I think home is where the need is significantly higher than
Hmm.
many of the use cases, and that's where people are wasting time. I think I did the math at some point, and there is on average people spend 6 trillion hours a day. I mean hours a year, sorry, 6 trillion hours a year spent by entire population in on earth just doing home chores. Okay.
Wow,
That's crazy amount of
it's
time, six
insane.
trillion hours. Okay. Now that's the time that you don't, which is we hate cleaning, we hate doing mundane and repetitive stuff. So that's the time we much
Right.
rather spend with kids, much rather spend being creative, productive, learning music, learning things. So just sheer need for these robots is actually ginormous in our opinion, and we just think there is a huge opportunity. And while it took a long time for us to get here, the foundation we've built is actually quite strong, and on that we can build many products. So in short term, I'm just super excited about getting married to all the pre-order customers and having them experience it, because there is no better feeling in the world than imagining a sort of a product that you think would be amazing, and then customers feeling the same way and kind of getting excited about it. So that's the short term. And in the long term, now the idea is, okay, so we've done clean floors. Great. Now what's next? From clean floors to clean homes, what is the next product? How do we solve manipulation? How do we solve locomotion? How do we solve a problem of you know dishwashers and floor cleaning? And you'll understand this particular point, which is every single appliance in our home is actually a
Mm.
batch process. So we are taught to collect dishes until dishwasher can be full, or collect clothes until dish washer dryer can be full. But we want to live in a perpetually clean home with perpetually clean floors. And this is what we had growing up in India, even as a middle class family. I remember, if you have a domestic help,
Yeah.
my clothes not only washed every day, they got ironed every day, and dishes get cleaned 3 times a day, and homes
Yeah.
get broomed and mopped twice a day. So entropy is always there. Our homes are constantly getting dirty, and we had this physical human being as a help matching that entropy and cleaning on our behalf all the time. Well, it's not. That's a perfect job for a robot. So, can we enable a future where homes are always clean, where we're always living in a hygienic environment, and we're not doing it? So, as a homeowner, as a family person, as a dad, I want to live in a perpetually clean home with perpetually clean floors and dishes and clothes. And I don't want to do it. I don't want anyone else to do it. I just want a robot to take care of it. So, there's a huge opportunity
Yeah.
to go after. That's what we're excited about.
Can't wait to kind of unpack when that time comes to talk to you about, like, a few years ago we talked about it, and you're doing it right now. I can't wait for the future to come in so that we can chat about this moment. uh, Last
Great.
question before we wrap up.
Yes.
I feel 2024 is the year for the hardware companies to come back. It's like a comeback year. It feels like, friend.com, uh, humane pain, even though it's like a disaster, but like there are a bunch of other things that are coming in. There is this tiny pod which is, it turns your Apple Watch into a small size phone. It's like
Mhm.
so many interesting hardware products are coming out. What is your take, or at least your prediction, that okay, these are the areas or the problems people are going to solve next? Where is the future of, even take robotics, or generally in hardware, this is where the direction is heading towards? I just want to go into your mind to bring those predictions out.
So all I can, a great question, and all I can kind of share is what we've learned over the years, because you know I might be one of the few ones who is still a founder in Silicon Valley who was around in first bubble as well as the second boom and third boom. And what I've seen is that each step change in some sort of a platform or technology allows new sort of hardware or new sort of products to emerge. So, in late 90s, obviously the laptops and PDAs and all those things came out. And then eventually, when the technology improved and the internet got faster, it enabled iPhone and smartphones. And now we're at a point where AI is another step change, which is actually
Yeah.
enable new devices. So, the renaissance of hardware is a function of sort of a step change in a technology or a platform. And you always say this, and to be honest, I'm really excited about all these guys, from Humane to Friend, to all these guys taking shots at building really really amazing products and trying to innovate. But we are still in a phase where people are still experimenting. And I remember this particularly. I quit this phase to sort of 2009 2010, post iPhone, when apps were
Hmm.
proliferating and everyone was building the Photos app or messaging app, or all kinds of interesting things. And Apple just released a feature where you can
Yeah, yeah.
the
Bring
money.
two phones
And I
together.
remember, yeah, and I remember one of my good friends and actually investor, David Libb, who is a partner at YC now. He built an app called Bump, where you bump your phones and it would transfer money and it would transfer contact information. And this was in 2009, 2010. There are 130 million app downloads. It just was way ahead of the curve. So a
Hmm.
lot of is sort of new again in that scenario, but we are still in this experimental phase. And within that, someone will figure out some killer use case where people just say, okay, I absolutely need this, that this is great. I think you have kids. I always felt that being with kids, there are times when I want to capture the moment. And if I had a camera
Sure.
built in and it could just turn and turn off, it would be great. But can it be done in an unintrusive way? Can it be done in a way where others users are privacies are not jeopardized? So those are all things that
Sure.
we would have. It's just a matter of someone productizing it and making it
Hmm.
work. And that's really the hard part. I want to emphasize that word. Productizing is really, really hard. It's you can have the same exact idea in a multiple different flavors, but those who productize well work.
Wow, that's so. I would definitely buy that to capture
Yeah,
kicks, the moments we spend with kids, because now we have to stop them and we have to ask
yeah,
them to do it again, which spoils the moment. And we're
yeah.
coming out of the moment.
Yeah, actually, Meta Ravens are a great example of AI getting implemented. They're not great as much yet as a personal assistants, but they have this feature and they're great. But the challenge is you still probably can't get them in a prescription glasses, or maybe you'll have to wear
Yeah,
lenses. So there are there. Um, Also, it's unfortunate, but there is a Meta has shipped some great hardware. It's just that there seems to be some concerns around privacy, and people haven't
sure.
taken it seriously. But I think Meta has shipped some great hardware, and Meta Ravens are amazing, and hopefully they'll keep adding amazing AI on top of it to make it really.
Mehul, you're kind of converting me, or your evangelism is working. I want to be like a hardware founder. What advice would you give me? No, I'm just. That's a very serious question, though. I'm just curious. If you were to suggest someone who wants to build a career, or not even career, like they want to be, they're very passionate. They want to be. They're entrepreneurs, but they want to try hardware. Where should they start?
I think. Okay, so first I'll repeat the advice that Tony Fadell gives, which is almost all solved problems can be solved using software, and if they can't be solved using software, don't do hardware. So even internally, even though we are robotics and hardware company, we have this motto that solve problems using software willingly, hardware grudgingly. So I would advise to be
Hmm.
very grudging about, which is you have to verify that there is no way this can be done without an amazing hardware, and then go and solve it, not without it. So that's one. So think hard. But if you really want to just start a hardware company, I think the best hardware is hard enough where more than anything, unless you have a background where you prototype, let's say at Waterloo or some other universities as a mechanical or engineer, I would recommend going and working at hardware company and seeing at least for a year and
Hmm.
getting trained and then coming and doing. This is one place where I don't think you can just hack your way to figuring it out. I may be wrong. I'm sure there are
Hmm.
people who've done it, but I feel like hardware is complex enough where you do need a little bit of an undergrounding, from some place which actually knows how.
Well, that's a. There is no shortcuts. You have to go through it, right? You have to go through the ins and outs. But any
It's
closing thoughts before we wrap up? Yeah.
I'll add this one framework, which is I believe I forget the name of the person who was a Google Venture Partners. I think it was Joe something, but he said that when company fails, right, you learn how not to fail. But there are thousands of
Hmm.
ways companies can fail. But there are very, very few ways it can succeed. So being part of the
Right.
success teaches you how to succeed, right? And that's really
Right.
a profound statement. So even though the startup that I had worked initially failed, I actually learned a lot more at Salesforce, a lot more at Light.com, a lot more at startups that worked, including at Nest. So in that scenario, you need to see how things work. So that's what I was trying to allude to in terms of when it comes to hardware, you're better off working in a one good company which is doing really,
Hmm.
really well from hardware perspective and just gaining enough insight to go do it.
Well, I think that's the right point where we should stop. I feel that's a great uh, that's a great advice right there. You have to go, test the waters, and you have to get into the weeds and learn, and then get out.
I think
So uh,
you did that for a time. So it's similarly, I think that probably enabled you what you're doing today. So you did that as well. So that makes sense.
yeah. It's kind of like an evolution, right? You go somewhere, you learn, and you
Mhm.
implement those lessons, and you try not to fail, you try to succeed. When you do
That's
that in this, it's all lessons and learning. And Mehul, I really, really, really appreciate. I didn't expect any of this, by the way. Honestly, guys, I was I was more into like, hey, how did you guys build like an FST type for Matic? That's literally one of my questions. Like, but I think it came out really great because you've dropped so many frameworks. I really love the building a problem deck versus solution deck, intensity, frequency, the scale of the problem. Those are some frameworks I feel they apply for everything, not hardware, software. You basically apply for every founder. So I genuinely want to, appreciate you for coming in and spending time sharing the experiences you had with us today. But yeah, that's it, folks. Stay tuned. I'll put all the frameworks and everything in the show notes for people mentioned and everybody, so that they can check the resources. The PG blog. I want to go read that blog right now. So appreciate you, Mehul. And stay tuned, guys. We have more guests, awesome people coming on the show. But appreciate you. Cheers. Thanks for listening.